great to be here with you, Jordan, and with everyone. It's such a fascinating novel, and I began by asking you, if you've read Jordan's first novel, and if you haven't, The Novelist, it's written in first person. You know what I mean? And it has, and we can talk about it as some autobiographical elements. So I want to ask you first, and we'll get more into it, because a lot of what really struck me about this novel, about the evolution of your style and your command of the novel form, from the novelist to Muscle Man, involved some narrative technique. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, what was it like shifting from that first person narration to the third person narration in Muscle Man?
I appreciate the question. It's something that I started writing it in first person, and then when I would read it back, it was like seriously shitty to be like in this guy's head in first person, and I wasn't able to get like a certain ironic distance that I wanted. Mm-hmm. So like it felt like the novel is very like digressive and has a lot of rants, and when you're reading it in first person, it just feels like an ugly guy, like this ugly consciousness. Like it's less mediated, it's mm-hmm. more immediate. And with the third person, I was able to create a sort of ironic distance to reveal things about the protagonist that I wasn't able to reveal, when it was just in his head.
Yeah. That, and I think it's really effective. Yeah, they.
I remembered another thing too.
Yeah.
Which was that one of the things that I was thinking about was the feeling of claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. My experience of being in school, basically since I was young, and then continuing until I was done with school, was just one of horrifying claustrophobia. And when I was reading these Gothic novels like Henry James or Shirley Jackson, there was a leakiness between the narrative voice and the surrounding. Mm-hmm. So the consciousness would sort of seep into the walls, and the architecture would seep into the protagonist's head. And it was always a little bit unclear as to whether or not something was happening inside the protagonist's mind or out there in the world. And sort of playing with that was I could do that in third person, and I couldn't necessarily do it in first person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I noticed that there's a grotesqueness to the environment, and something that I feel like your the narrative stance enables. He both enables you to see the kind of continuities between Harold's consciousness and the deformations of the other people or of the environment of this college. While also there being a distance there. I want to look at you. There's a bunch of passages that really show. I should say we're probably gonna talk for about a half an hour, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, if that's cool. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So there's the form. It's kind of technical form for this is free and direct discourse, where you're the author or the narrator is representing the thoughts of Harold without necessarily giving Harold's language. Sometimes Harold's language is given, and sometimes it's the narrator's language, because you can't quite decide that. Like Jane Austen was the great innovator of this form, and you're practicing it in a really cool way. But sort of the content of the thoughts are often these judgments that Harold is constantly making. You know what I'm saying? And I want to read just this one paragraph of early in the novel of a judgment, and then just and ask you to talk about it. You know what I mean? What is this judgment like? Like, how are we supposed to understand it, and like what are the different ways of understanding it? And I love this passage, and I've never worn backpacks, so maybe I was shielded from this.
Never?
I've never worn a backpack
That can't be true.
Even when I was little, it was this source of shame. I came from Ireland, and my mom had this leather, really nice Irish leather satchel that you couldn't wear, and it was a source of shame to me, because it was this nice object, but didn't have a brand name on it, so all the kids were like, "That sucks, it's nothing." You know what I mean? It was this cheap, crappy thing. So I never wore a backpack. I'd always carry it like this, and I never wore a backpack. And then later I developed an aversion to backpacks, which I think you talk about. Okay, so this is the bit. Backpacks are vulgar, he thought, staring at the black hole. They are frankly obscene. And even if his colleagues didn't notice the backpack specifically, because wearing strapped bags as a man had become, like all of the most detestable behaviors, normalized, they should still, Harold thought, at least sense that something had changed. Because Harold's wearing a backpack where he ordinarily wouldn't wear a backpack. Harold hadn't used a backpack since he was a child. Even in high school, he had opted for a briefcase. It was a risk, Harold knew. The only other kid who carried a briefcase in school was frail and boogery and had gas attacks in class. But Harold had played sports in middle school, which had been recent enough in his classmates' memories that he still retained some credibility. People still thought he was cool, even if a little strange. The briefcase, he calculated, would be forgiven by his would-be tormentors due to his proximity to them in their memory. By slandering Harold with any number of epithets he'd rehearsed as possibilities, briefcase boy, office monkey, they would implicate themselves, since Harold had so recently been one of them. Backpacks, those sticky pits of jumbled stuff, he thought, fondling his newfound acquisition, should be illegal. Backpacks made everyone look like turtles or mules, like peasants, Harold thought. And there was no way that his colleagues wouldn't immediately notice his new peasant-like demeanor. So, okay, so great. So he's making this judgment about backpacks. Like, backpacks make people look like turtles. They make people look like mules or like peasants. So what kind of judgment is this? Where's this coming from for Harold? And like, it's something that is simultaneously funny for the audience, but also sort of expressive of Harold. Yeah, and the novel has a lot of these kinds of moments, right, where he's making these kinds of judgments. Yeah, what can you tell us about that?
It's the true judgment. I don't know. I don't actually know. I mean, like, it's a great question. I think, how can I answer this? I think that there's like a lot of the novel is sort of oscillates between judgment directed outwards and then judgment sort of directed inwards, and often they're sort of muddy and they're often contained in the same thing. So it's like, you know, he's wearing a backpack. I think this is true often of like when we're making the harshest judgments. So it's like he's wearing a backpack, he's insecure about what other people will think of him, and then he's suddenly denouncing everyone who wears backpacks as like, originally the first draft said slaves, my editor had me change it to peasants. But like, you know, so he's like he's sort of like insecure and then lashing out. I think the novel is interested in, and in all my writing, I'm interested in the dynamics of pride and ego, which is basically something that elevates the prideful person in their imagination. And then when they encounter other people, the other serves as a sort of like, the encounter with the other dispels the delusions of grandeur, and they sort of sink below the person they encounter. Like Notes from Underground, that happens to some extent in Newt Hampton's Hunger. And so it's really this kind of thing where he's just doing this sort of insecure social calculus, where he's like, you know, well, you know, people think that I look like a turtle, but actually I played sports with them back in the day, so if they judge me, they're really judging themselves. And he's like, so it's the kind of like uneasiness of this mix of like ego, insecurity, and judgment. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And yeah,
I'm making that up. I'm not really sure. Mainly when I was writing, I thought it was funny. But I think that made some sense.
It totally makes sense. Yeah. And what's interesting about it is like, I feel like what you described, which is really, this is what's so good, I think, about like a good novel, is like, and how a novel differs from like a poem or an essay or something like that, where with an essay or a poem, when you represent the image or the judgment, it's like coming directly from the author to the reader, right?
Yeah.
And what you just described, I think, really is really what a novel can do really well, which is you've got the image or the judgment or the statement, and it's like refracted in all these ways, right? Where it's like a diamond, it reflects his own insecurity, it reflects his like something of his history. And all these
reflects cultural norms,
right? Totally,
all this kind of stuff,
which I love. But none of it would work. And this is kind of, and this gets, I think, to the heart of what I feel like some people have misunderstood about the novel, or it's a potential misunderstanding. Is it wouldn't work the same way if it wasn't getting at something true about backpacks.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like and that's I think the magic of the book, right? Because you're constantly having Harold say these things that are ranty, that are horrible, that reveal his own insecurities, but they're also in some sense true.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or at least they capture some some kind of aspect of usually kind of suppressed kind of truth. You know what I'm saying? So how do you think about that? Like, and I guess part of that is thinking about you or else the narrator, like, and your feeling about the backpack. You know what I'm saying? Like you know what I'm saying? Like is this judgment, like there's a truth to the judgment that the novel like activates even as it embeds it in these network of relationships and these obsessions and insecurities that Harold has.
Well, I mean, you're totally right that a lot of reviewers have totally missed this. There was one guy, a lot of reviewers have totally missed that. And so they're like, they sort of approach the novel, they say, does Jordan think this? Does he think this? Does he believe this? Does he not believe this? And for me, the thing is, like, if I wanted to write an op-ed about backpacks, I would have done that. And it would have been the stupidest thing I could possibly do. And the thing about a novel is that it filters judgments through a particular subjectivity within a network of relationships in a certain social context, and all of these things are happening at once in this kind of polyphonic and dynamic way.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
and so it's not just just like with a poem or the epic or an op-ed, it's like a speaker speaking to the audience to try and convince them of an idea. And I think like a novel is meant to make people see things anew, not just convince them of a point. And so you can have these judgments and these observations and stuff embedded in a novel, but it's also interesting because the texture of those judgments I just find really, really, really interesting. And then the other part of it is that, like, I've just from my own experience of being in school, is that from a young age I was like school sucks, my teachers are idiots, you know, I just want to read, and my teachers hate literature, like all this stuff, right? And when I was young, and so like I was totally convinced of my own rightness in relationship to, like, you know, the bureaucracy, to the school. And when I was younger, I couldn't articulate that, but it was like this sort of like energized rebellion against what I felt like was a dead and homogenizing thing. But then I got a little bit older, and I was like, actually, maybe that was just my pride. Maybe I was just rambunctious. Maybe I was just a little shithead and wanted to skip school. And so maybe, like, you know what I'm saying? Maybe all that stuff was just born of my, like, pride and ego, because I really didn't know that much and whatever. But now there's this sort of, like, synthesis where it's like both things are kind of true. You know what I mean? Where it's like you can perceive certain truths from a position of outsider status, or you know, you can, even if the narrator, like in this novel, is a complicated guy, or the protagonist, he can still get at certain true things. And then it's just interesting for me in the novel to illuminate all the other things surrounding it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, because Harold is a character who is, and again, I was there was one review in particular that I think Jordan's referring to, and I was struck by the kind of like idiocy of the review that was sort of just missing all these ways in which Harold is like a seriously, you know, flawed or complicated or like degraded character in lots of ways.
Well, yeah,
but yeah. So that but what's interesting is with the backpack thing, you know, it's on the one hand, it really is, as you really beautifully said, this you know, reflection of his own insecurity. He brings in his own like history of worrying about wearing a backpack and so forth. But at the same time, there is something like that maybe you would want as a writer, as a person, want to gesture towards the truth of, which is a certain kind of transformation of what men are, what men should do. That is in this case symbolized by wearing a backpack.
Oh yeah, right? I think he says like men should be able to subsist on nothing but their own will.
Right.
You know, they shouldn't have to carry like stuff.
Yeah. A wonderful. And so you get this like, it's great because it's like he's making fun of the backpack, but he's doing it from a position that's equally or even more so insane. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
But and this gets back to the question about what it was like. You know, I'm really interested, and I know you have a deep spiritual and religious sense and sensibility, and I wonder. I'm just thinking about authorship, and whether in turning from the first person to the third person as a writer, did you feel that writing was a place where judgments that maybe you made are ones that when you put into this novelistic space, you yourself got some distance from them?
Yeah, exactly,
So,
Yeah, I mean, I like for both of my novels. It's a great question, actually. For both of my novels, like a lot of them started with some mix of like ranting, like actually ranting in my iPhone or something like that, like in a notes app, and then like playing around with some narrative story or things like that. You know, the first novel was like ranting in my iPhone while writing this thing about getting distracted on social media, and then like integrating the two. And this was sort of, also includes a lot of rants. But the thing that's so interesting is like when I write these judgments down, they get revealed as being ugly or not totally true, or you can sort of realize where they're coming from, something like that. And I'm trying to think. I mean, the shift to third person. I feel like that's a part of writing for me, is this kind of process of like testing ideas. Like in this book, I was like really interested in the idea of strength, and the idea of like vitality, and the idea of there's this bureaucratic sort of like human resources style mode that like academia is in, and sort of one is sometimes tempted to react against that with a certain kind of like anger or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was like interested in just exploring that, and I think the novel's a good form for that.
Yeah, and I think that's
and it gives me distance so that I can critique it. I can look at it from all around. It's not just like here are my ideas.
Yeah, and maybe we can shift a little bit into thinking about academia and that as a context for this, is the situation that he's in as a professor at this liberal arts college. I want to ask about why you chose academia, but first I want to say there's a few different kinds of images, there's a few different kinds of contents of Harold's thought that we get access to. A lot of them are the judgments that you talked about. Actually, before we go for you have this great formulation of thought talking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Harold is imagining. If you haven't read the book, there's early parts of it, and I think this goes all the way through it, where he's like imagining being interviewed. I think how many people have imagined being interviewed, like as a daydream, and like you know what I mean? Like he does that.
I've gotten a lot of messages and emails from people being like, when I drive and I'm thinking, I imagine myself on a podcast too.
Yeah. Totally a strange and real thing. But this idea of thought talking, right? Like I feel like one of the really interesting things about the novel is its representation of thought, and his thoughts are like the thought talking is really interesting, like because it's not like almost every thought is like for an audience.
Yeah.
Right. So say more about that. Like it's I think there's like deep questions about who he is or who anyone is. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like real philosophical issues that get raised with this device. But I was really struck by that formula of thought talking, and then I'm like, when am I thought talking? And it feels like this weird inauthentic place or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. One of the things that bothers me a lot about novels is that they'll have some text and then they'll say like he thought. I'm like, that is nothing like what people think like. You know what I mean? It's just not. People don't think at least for myself, it's like I don't think generally in complete sentences that like you could read. Often it's like or like you know what I mean? And so I have those kinds of thoughts too in there. But one of the things, and I think this ties into your question about it being set in academia, is that Harold is very paranoid about his colleagues and what they think of him. He's in this sort of hyper-progressive, hyper-surveilled environment where, there's sort of like social media is a part of it. There's this general sense in the university he's in of being surveilled. And often, people in situations like that are like, they're navigating, I mean, okay, so it's like you know, if you use the internet, the sort of internet consciousness that can happen is that like you're driving and you're like thinking, and then you're simultaneously imagining what this kind of like other is going to think about your thoughts, because there's this way in which this kind of surveillance, this kind of like this kind of high pressure scenario to think the right thoughts, which is like something that happens in academia a lot, can make you kind of negotiate this space between yourself and the other, even when you're alone. And so there's that part of it, and then the other part of it is just that maybe it was a sort of practical concern, which was that I did want to include sort of rants in the novel, and I was like, well, if they're full thoughts, it has to be some sort of reason that he can't just be thinking them. So maybe he's thought talking them and imagining himself on a podcast or something like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, because it's the whole idea of thinking things, and I feel like another part of it, the surveillance thing is really interesting. Some things we talk a lot about in academia is self-censorship.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
So like is that part of the thought talking? Is it speech that has been driven inside by a kind of a certain kind of restrictive culture? Or?
Well, yeah, driven inside, yes, for sure. Well, but it's not him censoring himself necessarily. I think a lot of the time, I mean, I've talked to like tons of academics and like literary people who feel this way. I think a lot of other people feel this way too, where like they're angry and they're like sort of resentful and they're impotent because something about the place where they work doesn't allow them to express themselves, or you can't say it's like you can't say a certain thing to your boss, and so you're driving home and you're just like fuming and you're like suddenly hyper articulate. You know what I mean? When you're thinking about the faults, when you're thinking about the faults of other people, you can be incredibly articulate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so some of it is that it's that sort of culture you're describing, and then a sort of impotent resentment that like sort of, it's like a misdirected desire to like pwn his like enemies or something like that while he's by himself.
Yeah, that comes across, and it made me think. There's this famous thing by the philosopher Michel Foucault, who he called the repressive hypothesis, and he was sort of his intuition was, it was the 70s. He's like, this is the weirdest thing in the world, where everyone in America and in the West is it is the culture and the history of the world that talks the most about sex of any culture in the world. You know what I mean? More speech is produced about sex, and yet everyone's constantly saying that we're repressed. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, and he was just like, there's a link between those two. The idea that you're repressed actually produces endless speech. You know what I'm saying? And I'm wondering. I was thinking about that when you were when I was rereading this for our conversation, Jordan, about whether it's whether there's a kind of like I feel like there's some way in which this repressive environment of the school is related to these rants, or this kind of like what you could describe as hyper articulate like attacks on everything that's coming from this guy. Is that fair to say? Is that what you're noticing?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. That sounds good.
So another thing that is like through the novel and is really interesting, and it's something I never really consciously thought of. I'm a professor and I've been in academia forever, like violence is like there's this throughout the novel. There's this incipient or implicit violence everywhere, right? And in a way, like this novel was written obviously before, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk and all the bizarre things that were said in response to it on the part of academics. And as people are kind of like more conscious of this kind of incipient or implicit, sometimes explicit kind of violence in the academic context. But I feel like this novel is really like prescient about that.
Thanks.
And it does it without really... How are you thinking about violence in this book? Like, how are you thinking about it? Because it wouldn't be obvious. Like, one of the things that's interesting is like if I said I'm going to read, someone gave me a book and they're like it's about contemporary academia, I wouldn't expect it to have like violence was the major subtext of almost every interaction, almost every thought. And it is here. So how did you arrive at the idea that you wanted to do that, or how did that emerge as you were writing?
I appreciate, that's for sure. I was thinking about violence a lot, and there's a couple of different things. One is that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about René Girard. But, there's this literary critic named René Girard who I was thinking about a lot. And his idea basically is that violence emerges from mimesis. And so, like, in a situation where everybody wants the same thing, he basically says that violence is not the result of difference, it's the result of sameness. And so, in academia, where you have a bunch of people who want the same thing, are learning the same things, are competing for the same things, and are increasingly actually homogenous, that there's something incredibly violent about that homogeneity. And so, like, people talk about, you talk a lot about, like, viewpoint diversity and all these other kinds of things, but it's like in a scenario where, people think and act increasingly the same, the thinking goes that it would be more violent. And I think that there's really, like, a lot of violence kind of undergirding a lot of what goes on in academia, and part of so there's this kind of sort of ambient violence, but then there's also, after, I didn't go to grad school, and, my wife did, and I remember after Trump's election in 2016, going down there to sort of, like, semi-ironically, or just go as an observer to the Women's March, and her roommates were, like, these kind of, like, just normal, soft-spoken grad students, making signs that said things like, "Your silence will not protect you." Like these, like, super violent signs. And I'm just like, whoa. You know what I mean? And people talk about, like, we have to kill, blah, blah, blah. And then of course, then there's actual violence, where it's like, I was just at a conversation at the University of Albany, and about masculinity with this developmental psychologist from NYU. And she's like, we need to understand the problem of men, we need to listen to the problems of masculinity so that we don't get Trump and that we don't get mass shootings. And then she said, just recently there was a killing on campus, but that's a different kind of violence, and maybe that's okay. Like, was like sort of like had to justify the killing of Charlie Kirk because it was like the right kind of violence. You know what I mean? And I think often the violence that we justify is the violence that allows us to scapegoat our enemy. It's like, well, that's not a person. That violence doesn't count. In academia, in some weird way, I was thinking, like, a lot of the work that goes on there seems to be just like a really complicated way of justifying violence and hatred of your enemies. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very insightful. I mean, it's as someone, I was just talking with a friend of mine who's also a professor, and he works at a liberal arts college, which I never have. I've been at research universities my career, but I was like, he's reading your book, and I was like, Aaron Clune, and I was like, does this seem like Pomona? And he's like, yeah, basically. Yeah. You know what I mean? It seems accurate, and that's something. It's like a kind of emotional, like, infrared photography of the space. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like you're seeing things that are not really visible otherwise, or maybe they're becoming visible with some of the increased violence in the last year or two on campuses. But for a long time were, I think, really implicit. It's disturbing, but it also gives that novel itself a kind of energy. You know what I'm saying? Like, and one thing that interests me, and I want to ask you about, is the difference between, like, the aesthetic and, like, the ethical or spiritual or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, in one sense, I think we've been talking about it as like you're diagnosing a real condition of colleges, and that's a kind of truth that this novel is communicating. But also, it's a really fun novel to read in that there's this not a lot is happening at the level of plot, but it's vitalized continually in part by this current of violence. So in some ways, the novel likes the violence. You know what I'm talking about? As a novel, even as ethically, we're like, what the hell is going on here? These are schools. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's up with this? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
like as a writer, in other words, and we've talked about this with other writers we know and other writers in history, where sometimes there's a tension between what works as art and then what your morality is.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? And I feel like you bring those into alignment in some places, but sometimes there's a kind of tension between there. You know what I mean? The reveling, like the rants are super fun to read. You know what I mean? Like they're really it's like great. It's like yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like this vicarious kind of even then as you're like, but you nest it in a way that then you're able to be like, whoa, you know, like this is messed up or whatever.
Yeah. I was thinking this morning about like maybe like some sort of essay I could write that like sort of tracks like literary, like sort of like maps literary modernism sort of onto our moment or something like that. And I was thinking about how, because I'm like, man, in some ways I feel like I have someone like Dostoevsky or T.S. Eliot as my model, my sort of like, you know, some sort of spiritual kind of like in search of transcendence kind of model. But then in other ways I feel like I have like Wyndham Lewis and Nutt Hampson or Celine as my model, because they write this really propulsive, almost violent prose.
Yeah.
And then in other ways, I feel like someone like Virginia Woolf, who's like this retreat into consciousness, or Proust, or you know, something like that. Like, you know, what I like the three kind of like, because in a weird way, it's like if you're writing against, in some ways, the contemporary moment, which is like, in some ways, I think of like, you know, something like AI or technology as this kind of like hyper rational thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you know, in some ways, we have this conception of history that, you know, people are fundamentally reasonable and things are fundamentally progressing, and you know, and then technology is basically, it's just reason. And like the modernists were like reacting against that in all sorts of different ways after World War I or whatever, you know. And so like they're just like, actually people are totally unreasonable, and the unconscious is totally unruly, and you know, maybe, you know, for T.S. Eliot it's like we need the divine order, or maybe for Wyndham Lewis it's like we need like a super strong state, or maybe for, you know, Virginia Woolf or someone like that it's like we need to sort of retreat into consciousness, and that's where we can find meaning and all that kind of thing. But in so that's a long way of saying that I feel like all those things might be a little bit in tension, and I'm not sure.
I'm like
a little bit
great.
of all of that.
I think that's great, because like, yeah, you know, the novel has a structure and a kind of, and there's a Girardian kind of like framework to it to a degree, but it escapes that kind of a work of art that is really like captured by a structure and by a reason is also dead.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is very much alive. And like there's a moment I wanted to ask you about, which maybe this will be the last question we'll open out. We'll open it up. There's what I love about it is, in one sense, it's a very concentrated novel, right? It's about one guy, a brief period of time where the narrator is following. It's focalized through his consciousness. So it's very intense and focused, and a lot of pieces fit together, like the violence thing, the homogeneity thing, the scapegoating, you know, dimension. But then there's all these wonderful moments that don't seem to quite fit, that I love. Like, I love the moment when you're describing the architect who designed the college. You know what I mean? Like there's this architect, there's this long passage about the architect who's this crazy who has the crazy ideas of what like college architecture should be. And what was great about it was like it gave it the novel this sense, it gave it this reality effect where it's like including something that isn't entirely enclosed in the rest of the dynamics of the novel. Like, what were you thinking? Like, yeah, what did you think of that? Like, just that section. Was that part of a larger kind of theme when you were writing, or were you just like, this is a really cool idea, and I just going to go with this idea of this philosophical college architect?
I'm trying to remember. I know that like right before the book came out, Nicolette was like reading it. We were in copy editing stages, and she was teaching a class about architecture and fiction, and was like reading it out loud to me, so we could like catch any like minor copy editing mistakes. And she was like, "This makes no sense." She was like, "This is horrible. This like literally doesn't make any sense." And so we did like major revisions to that part, like at the very, 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 very end. And one of the things, and like actually very major revisions, and like one of the things that I was sort of trying to think about was like the way that One thing was just that when Nicola was at Yale, we would like be walking around, and the one thing people always said is they would look at this building and they would be like, "Wow, like that's a wonderful like old building. I love these old buildings." And then they'd be like, "Well, that was actually built 2 years ago." You know what I mean? And then you would go inside, and it would be like this totally disharmonious kind of furniture. You know, like it was like this weird mix of like time periods. You know, it's like one is like a simulacrum of like the far past. One is like this incredibly modern, all sort of glass thing. You know, it's like there's just all sorts of different clashing architectural styles. And because I was at first trying to do a sort of Gothic novel where the architecture interacts with the protagonist's mind, I thought that like I could almost map in some loose way the history of academia in this like architect's kind of philosophy, or the different architects, because there's a handful. But then also too, just I don't know, it was a hodgepodge of things. We were reading the Bacelard book, Poetics of Space.
Yeah.
And just thinking about the way that I don't know, different time periods interact, and the way that buildings interact with your thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I like the whole genre of like imaginary artists in novels. This is just a great one. Okay, but we've got some time for questions, so we'll open it up.
We don't have to do.
If you don't have questions, I've got more questions.
I have a question, and I think this will make most sense to the audience, and maybe not be so.
Oh yeah, my
obvious
dad.
to
We
you.
were earlier. My dad was like, when you use big words, make sure to define them so I can understand them. And like,
True.
and of course, this was like by far the most heady conversation about the book I've had. So anyway, yeah, go ahead with your
So
question.
again, this will make most sense to the audience, and maybe not so much you two. But I know Harold is about lifting weights and his body, and I think at times he feels body shamed, and sometimes he feels anger. Does he ever figure out how to unfuck his stress?
Oh, that's the thing. Oh, you're totally, okay. So I was like, that was one of the things I was going to actually mention, is that like I'm sorry to Max Bax about this, but it's really your fault. I'm constantly making fun of stuff like this. What is this like elder millennial way of swearing? It's like unfuck your business, unfuck your grief, unfuck your anger, like coercive control, how to recognize and end abuse in your life. Okay, I don't understand that fact. There are some, you go to a bookstore and they're like, it'll be like, you know, how to like kick ass and you know, fuck your business. And it's like what even is? I think of it as like me and my friend Pat were talking about how it's like if you say it in like a demon voice, it makes sense. Like man, you know, like fuck. Anyway, we try not to swear now because that's how it sounds when you swear.
Yeah. Good observation.
Yeah, great observation, actually. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
What's your writing process like? Like, I know you both are writers, so how does that work as a dynamic, and also just in general?
As a couple?
You've
just
Jordan and I are not a couple.
Yeah.
You should have made that.
That's
I should have made that
way
clear.
No, I mean like how do you guys work with each other, but also separately? 'Cause obviously, you can't write together all the time.
Who did we just listen to? We just listened to this really great David Zwerner podcast with who was it? James Wood and Claire. Yeah, it's really good. You should listen to that. But
Is that your answer?
No, I
was like, no.
I don't know. What do you? I mean, like we work separately, and then like we get home, and then we work together.
I go out of the house and we get home usually.
Yeah, but we're always talking about stuff, and it's nice. I don't know how I would justify. Like I sometimes thought about that, like never having to justify like wanting to just like read and write like late on like a Friday or something. You know, it's great. But I don't know. We're always talking about I don't know, helping each other, and I don't know. Yeah, editing each other's work and stuff. Yeah, it's like and then just doing it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and are you able to keep it like not like? Is there like a healthy competition, or is it just not a competitive kind of zone? I always feel like as a writers suffer from like you're isolated and like very often like you're envious. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
I think
angry. You know what I mean? Like so, how you're right about that here. So like, is that
I don't write about that with your spouse. No, I've read there was like an essay Emily Gould wrote in like the New Yorker or something about like how she almost got a divorce because of like envy because of her more successful writer husband. And I just truthfully don't feel that. I don't know. I feel like if this is like corny, but I feel like when Nicolette wins, it's like we win, or like when you know what I mean. It's
That's
just
great.
like we win.
That's
I don't know like how to describe it. And then also I think we're both just so legitimately fixated on trying to make the best work we can make that there's no actual competition there. We're also writing different modes and stuff like that. But it's like it's like when one of us wins, we're like. Also we love God more than whatever status or like that kind of a thing. It just like makes it totally different.
That's great. Yeah. There was this. Aaron has this thing on Shakespeare where, like Shakespeare has this. A lot of art has this fantasy where your work would like actually colonize the whole rest of the world. You know what I mean? Like. Everything else will be forgotten except my works. I'm Shakespeare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that kind of ambition that I feel like is writers can suffer from. You know what
But
I'm
it's
talking
super weird. Yeah, but I don't. Yeah, it's hard enough to make something actually good.
Yeah.
And so if you just focus on that, a lot of the other stuff like falls away.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
How do you put somebody else's opinions into these characters and without it always being your opinion? Like, or are they always your opinions?
They're definitely not always my opinions. I think it's. I mean, one thing that. I mean, this is actually one reason why I feel like novel writing in particular is sometimes at odds with like people who are more political or something like that. Which is that in order to write a novel well, you actually have to be able to like understand other people's perspectives. And it's like really hard to do if you're like, I'm always right and this is my thoughts and and so like I'm just really interested in trying to like model other people's ways of thinking, which is like fun, but also I think like a good thing to do in general. I don't know.
Well, isn't that weird to know a mimetic like you were talking about with like the homogeneity and violence, right? Like, or other people's ways of thinking are often my ways of thinking. You know what I mean? And I hate them. Like that's Harold's kind of like perspective.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Oh, I was reading Castle to Castle recently, the Celine novel. This really insane and weird novel that's like just tons of like fragmented ... like impressionistic kind of a thing. I'm trying to remember, what am I even... I think that's what I'm most I've been obsessed with Patricia Highsmith lately, but I think that's what I was reading most recently. Castle to Castle, Castle by Castle.
Castle to Castle. Yeah, he was a Nazi collaborator, and when the Allies took over, he started running with the Nazi regime in this shameful way from Castle to Castle. Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah, that's what the book's about. It's true.
Well, I knew that he was. I knew that he was like. Well, because I was reading about him the other day, and I was reading about him the other day, and it was like he. It's weird because at like the height of his fame, he started writing these super aggressive anti-Semitic pamphlets, and then was just like relegated to obscurity for a little while, and then kind of revived. But it's really anyway.
Yeah,
Unrelated to the novel.
No, I wonder if it's totally unrelated.
To some extent.
Some of the same stuff is going on there. Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about. You talked about some of your influences. Like, do you also have aversions, literary aversions, like books that like, or writers that like a lot of people like? I'm not talking about like some random book, but like books that like are venerable, and you just look at it and you're like, that is totally not my thing, right? You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like people often ask writers in these contexts about like your inspirations, but I think aversions are even more kind of interesting. Do you have like literary aversions you'd want to share, or like?
I mean, we've talked about this before, but Jan Fosse's septology
Yeah.
bothers me a lot. I mean, the thing now is I just put books down. Like if I'm not liking them, I just put them down. But yeah, I don't know. Septology is very, I don't know, just bothers me because it does the thing that I was talking about before, which is that like it's this very sentimental thing, and it's like he thought, or maybe it's I thought. It's just like that's not how thinking happens, and that just drives me insane. It's like very sentimental and very, and everybody tells me. That's the other thing is like normally my aversions are like when everybody tells me I should like something, and then I read it, and then I just like don't like it.
Yeah, you feel like everyone is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a great image in the Novelist about literary culture now, and it's great because it has a relation to addiction, and you're like they love to have very clearly separated moral lines, like lines of coke on a mirror.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love that image because it just brings together a bunch of different things. Like, what are you, for those who don't know about our corrupt current literary culture, what were you talking about?
I'm tired. I don't even like I don't even have the steam to rant about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just like basically the novels that the literary versions I have are novels that place like ideology or morality or something other than literary qualities above literary qualities, and I think that like you can find this all over the place, and it's in most of the reviews of my book focus mainly on the cultural context, or in this case it was weird. I wrote a novel called Muscle Man, and I didn't expect people to write about masculinity, and suddenly everything is like, this is what this novel says about masculinity, or this is what this novel says about our current moment in the manosphere, and all things that like I truthfully wasn't thinking about. You know what I mean? And it's not just like that I wasn't thinking about them, but it's like people seem to have, it's sort of like what you talk about, which is that in literary culture in general, people have stopped making aesthetic judgments, so they don't look at the kinds of qualities that you were just talking about, and instead they make moral judgments, which is, so they look at like, you know, where does this align or not align with the views that I already hold.
Yeah.
And normally when a writer writes like that, it like immediately cripples the work, and it's just like impossible to read. I mean, I'm like, for some reason I was just emailing with someone about movies last night, so movies are top of mind, but like if you've seen the movie Sinners. Anyway, you guys seen Sinners?
Yeah.
You guys seen Sinners? Yeah, Friedman, you saw Sinners?
Seen it, yeah.
Anyway, I just feel like
Case closed.
you know, case closed.
But I think it's totally true. I feel like some of those reviews of Jordan's book are like, it feels like they're like, but what does he? Is it good or bad? Is he?
Yeah.
And like it feels like they're fiending. They're not getting what they need from it,
know,
which is this clear. Yeah, I love that image, man. I thought it was perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Please join me in thanking Jordan for his awesome.
And thank you.
Cool. All right, man. Good
Thank you.
stuff.
Books for sale back here on the table.
Are you getting?
It's jumping.
I think it's one.
Sounds like